Today we'll be talking about the interrogative pronoun and interrogative adjective. Both of these are like brothers or cousins to the relative pronoun, and we'll be working with many of the same words in English and in Latin. I know what you're thinking. Whose idea was this? For what reason on earth do we need to know another pronoun? To whom is this any benefit at all? Okay, I'm making bad puns, but it's just for fun. Okay, let's look at some examples of the interrogative pronoun. Like I said before, we're going to be dealing with many of the same words, both in English and in Latin, as we did with the relative pronoun. However, the interrogative pronoun asks a question. So we have, who are you? Whose book is this? To whom did you give it? What are you doing? With whom were you speaking? We're using the same words that we did with the relative pronoun, but now we're putting them into a question.
Let's take a look at the forms. However, before we even get going, do you recognize something unusual about this chart? Yeah, the masculine and feminine columns have been condensed into one. And specifically, we use this column if we're talking about people. The neuter column we use if we're talking about things. Okay, let's write out the forms. For the masculine and feminine, we have quis in the nominative. We had qui before for the relative pronoun. For the genitive, we have quis, just like we had for the relative pronoun, and qui for the dative. Again, just like for the relative pronoun. For the accusative, we have quem, which is the accusative singular masculine form we saw in the relative pronoun, and then likewise we have quo, which is the ablative singular masculine we saw in the relative pronoun. So, differentiating this column from the masculine column of the relative pronoun, our only difference is the quis. For the neuter, where we had quad before, now we have quid. For the genitive, we have quis. So once again, these are the same regardless of the gender. And qui for the dative. Once again, that is the same regardless of gender for the dative and the interrogative pronoun. Then we have quid. And finally, quo. So those two are the same.
Let's take a look at some examples. How I have this chart divided, they all go in the nominative through ablative pattern. So nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and ablative. On the left side, I'm dealing with people, or the masculine and feminine column. And on the right side, we're dealing with things, or the neuter column. Okay, our first example, who loves you? We're dealing with a nominative, who, which is doing the action of the verb loves. So we have quis. We see the possessive whose in the sentence, whose shoe is this? And we're using quis for the word whose. For to whom, dative indirect object, and to whom did you tell it? We're using qui. Whom do you fear? The object of the fearing. We're using quem to say whom. And with whom shall I stay? We're using quo. You might have noticed that the preposition cum is attached to the end of the quo, and that's very standard for the preposition cum with essentially any pronoun. Okay. Now, let's take a look at the things column. We have what is it, expressing the what with the quid. This is a case of what. We have a genitive of. So we're using quis. To what do I owe the pleasure? We're using qui. What are you doing? We have what being the direct object of the verb doing. We're using quid. And with what did you hit him? Quokum. Let's look at these plural forms. Do they already strike you as familiar? That's right, they're just the plural of the relative pronoun. So if you haven't already memorized the relative pronoun, now might be a pretty good time. And this makes everything, all as far as memorization is concerned, a lot easier, because the interrogative pronoun only has some slight tweaks and differences from the relative pronoun in the singular and is identical to it in the plural.
Okay, so a big question is, how do you differentiate between the relative and interrogative pronoun? And this is a great question. Well, first of all, the relative pronoun is always associated with subordination. And in our sample sentence, hic est vir qui meum crucialem edit, we have a relative clause, as you would expect. However, the interrogative pronoun is essentially never associated with a relative clause, or any subordinate clause in general. It usually leads a main clause. As we see in this sentence, quis meum crucialem edit, who ate my cookie?
We also have the interrogative adjective. An interrogative pronoun replaces a noun, but an interrogative adjective modifies a noun. Let's take a look at some examples. For the pronoun, we have, what did you see? But for the adjective, there's a noun that our interrogative adjective, what, is modifying. That is, what movie did you see? What is modifying the noun movie? In our next example, we have our pronoun, with what did you hit him? But for the adjective, it is with what weapon. What is agreeing with the word weapon. So with what weapon did you hit him?
Here's the chart for the interrogative adjectives. Take a second and see if they seem familiar to you. That's right, they're the same as the relative pronouns. Now, we've actually seen this concept multiple times before, where the adjective and the pronoun form are the same. In fact, ille is a great example, because ille can mean that man, or you can say ille vir, which also means that man. It's up to your stylistic preference which version you want to use. Ille in the first sentence is functioning as a pronoun, whereas in the second it is functioning as an adjective. The same applies for isea it. You can either say ea, which means she, or that woman, and it's functioning as a pronoun, or you can say ea femina, which means that woman. Again, it's up to your stylistic preference. That's the interrogative adjective.